This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And here's your host, Paul Dickerson.
Hi, I'm Paul Dickerson, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. First up, Ron Bolen, Managing Director of the investment bank da3co, telling us all about domestic natural gas. Next up, we hear from Philippe Flichy, CEO of IO Hub, a company using software to anticipate and prevent disasters in the energy industry. All that right after this.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome to the Energy Makers Show. We have with us again Mr. Ron Bolen, Managing Director of da3co. Ron, great to have you on the program.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
I would like today for us to dig into domestic natural gas, specifically fracking.
Yes.
Start us off. Tell us the current state of the market.
Well, we take the position that hydraulic fracking or hydraulic fracturing is probably the most dynamic technological change we'll see in hydrocarbon recovery in our lifetime. If you look at the way producers have been able to go into, if you will, forgotten fields to exploit or even re-exploit lost reservoirs, we've seen an impact in multiple ways, not just in the development of the technology, but in the impact on the price of supply and demand. We have moved from a wildcatting position on natural gas to just-in-time manufacturing. If you will, as hydrocarbon recovery started, you had men and women that would literally roll the dice every time they punched a hole into the surface of the earth, hoping that they grabbed hydrocarbons, either coal or natural gas. With the fracking technology, we have essentially eliminated the dry hole risk. What we've done now is we've created an efficiency play, and I think that we'll see the successful companies that are engaged in fracking really looking at controlling lifting costs or controlling their fracturing costs. Really a different mindset, if you will, across the spectrum of recovery. With regard to the price impact, we have moved essentially, if the fracking technologies and the shale plays play out the way I think most observers believe they will, we could see the United States move from being a price taker on the global fuels market to essentially a price maker. There's certainly people out pontificating that the U.S. will become an exporter of natural gas, whether that be LNG, CNG, however we do it. To concept as a young man growing up in the industry, thinking in terms that we would actually be exporting fuels from the United States to the rest of the global market is sort of shattering for me.
Well, and explain that further. Do you think that we'll see these ports turn around? I know there's been some talk of delays and whether it may happen.
That's a great question. I believe if we look historically, we'll see that the LNG terminals that were originally being constructed in the United States were to be imports.
Sure.
Right. We were going to move from a cartel of 7 in OPEC into a cartel of 4 for the primarily nat gas producing countries. We've essentially inverted that. A number of the LNG projects and even some of the existing terminals are now thinking in terms of, okay, how do I take this product back out to the global market? Again, something I never would have guessed as a younger man.
So what's holding industry back? Is it politics? Is it regulation? Is it money?
Yes, yes, and yes. We see it as sort of multiple steps. Certainly in, if you will, the court of public opinion, there's been some disinformation out there which is causing movement on the regulatory side of things. Whether or not those pull out through fruition to be impactful, we don't know. But what we do know is any sort of uncertainty stifles the flow of capital. Capital then begins to drag its heels a little bit. Projects don't get done. supplies don't get met into the marketplace. The second thing I think that's going to happen is an impact on the technologies. The groups that are still moving towards fracking and will keep pushing that technology are getting extraordinarily efficient at the use of the technology. We're seeing the embedding of biotech as well as nanotechnology in frac sands, and that is a really exciting development for sort of the way I see the world. And then finally, I think it alters the way that people approach the industry. I think that we will see a real shift in rig rate as well as labor forces as they begin trying to deal with the idea that we are seeing a demand of really high-wage jobs in the domestic U.S. If you and I had been sitting down and having a beer 2 years ago or 4 years ago is probably a better timeline and said, wow, North Dakota would have sort of a dynamic growth on state domestic, I would have just been flabbergasted. And of course, we see every day in the press the shortage of housing to handle labor that's moving into the marketplace to deal with the needs there.
Well, lots of changes. Thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime.
And that concludes our discussion with Ron Bolen. We'll be back with more right after this.
Where will the energy come from to move us forward? From natural sources in abundant supply? Or perhaps a man-made source? At NRG, we believe innovation will solve our energy needs. That's why NRG is moving away from fossil fuels towards wind, solar, and other sustainable technologies to power the smart grid, the electric car, and our clean energy future. We're using all of our energy to develop more of it.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. We have with us now Philippe Flichy, CEO of IO Hub. Philippe, great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about IO Hub.
Well, IO Hub is a startup very much at the beginning, which came from the idea of my background in MIS and looking at the monstrous amount of data that we now have in the oil and gas industry and how we cannot afford to have specialized engineers micromanaging all this data and looking for the tiny bit of important information in all of it.
Well, and we've all seen how technologies advance so quickly. I can only imagine that the quantity of data in the oil and gas field has just grown exponentially.
Absolutely, because it's cheaper and cheaper to collect data. It's cheaper and cheaper to put it on disk. But then you haven't solved anything. It's just like most of our addicts, we pile things up. And what the important thing is to find the jewel in the middle of it. And that's really what we're working at. So
your job is to parse through all the static and find the real important pieces.
The important piece. And really it's like, sorting out. I'm not going to go into all technical details about it, but it's really a mathematical approach, fairly new, fairly recent, that allow you to really pay attention to what we call the complex, the data intense, the intensity of the data, where the data is intense. Sorry about that.
So I'm sure we have a variety of technology providers out there. Why would one of our friends in the oil and gas space think, all right, that's a guy we need to call?
Good point. Well, most of us that really have been working on that, and it's been over 10 years now that I've been working in the digital oil field. And the challenge that we try to apply two other technologies called rule-based and model-based.
Rule versus model.
Yeah, that's two other approaches where basically you're trying whether to have the computer understanding what's happening and defining some rules to sort your data, or yourself, you're building the rules and say, well, when this, and that. But you keep on having, looking at thresholds. And the second part is that we don't really know the detail. We have a good understanding, but not the detail of what is it down there, the data that we are observing. So what we're trying to do is to reverse that logic and look at the result data, and out of that say, what is this data telling us?
Now, you have done, 3 different startup companies?
Right.
What was it about this technology or this company that got you excited?
Well, that was interesting because it was really by talking to CTOs, some very large, the majors, that we came to the conclusion that we didn't have the right technology. And this is, well, if you feel that you can find the right technology, almost good luck.
Right.
And so I went around. I mean, I've done a lot of research in the past in my life. So I went back to those people and tried to go totally outside the oil and gas industry, talk to people, take it, the cliche out of the box, and try to see what we could do. So we developed a technology, or we adapted technology, because really there were a lot of grounds before, but we adapted that from other fields. It's been used a lot. This technology has been used a lot in satellite imaging analysis. So it's Department of Defense have used a lot that type of approach. And so it's not new, but the way we're using it is definitely totally new.
Well, let's get specific. Give me an example of when a customer would benefit from your technology.
Let's take the example of drilling, which is an area where there's a lot at risk, because your drilling rig costs you about $1 million per day. So any time you save on that rig is very important. A typical example, for instance, is we've been looking with many companies, is what we call kicks. It's when you have some flow back into your pipe system and can create some very bad accident, can go on fire and can even blow the whole space. So usually they arrive pretty late. It's sometimes difficult to predict that this is going to happen. And that's where being able to analyze some micro events before the big events and some very slight changes in trends, which our software is very good at doing, you can start seeing things happening and anticipating and take the time to react.
Well, you're always good at taking complex material and bringing it to a level that anyone can understand. I thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was a pleasure. Very nice to be here.
And that wraps this episode of the Energy Makers Show, heard on the radio nationwide and seen right here at TheEnergyMakers.com. I'm Paul Dickerson, and we'll see you next week.